This week's presentation, Know Thyself, presented by John Stockdike. Previously at Open Circle, John has shared both his spiritual journey and his mental health challenges. Today, he will share more insights from his journey in life. One of the greatest of these, he believes, is the journey of deep self-discovery. Knowing well our own story can open us to appreciating the stories of others and help mitigate the alarming polarization in the world today. John and his wife, Pat, have lived at Lakeside for 5 years. Previously, they resided in Calgary, Alberta. Last year, he launched the Ahihi Book Club, which focuses exclusively on nonfiction. I think you're doing When Breath Becomes Air. Yes? Oh, I love that book. Please welcome John.
Thank you, Kat. I suppose I should start by explaining the t-shirt. You probably can't read the letters. Maybe you can't even see the t-shirt. Right. It says Energizer Night Race. It's a shirt that makes me feel good because I've been a lifelong runner. Just recreational, not a competitive runner at all. But it's been a part of my life, so this is just a feel-good shirt. Because if you think of the idea of being in our bodies, I really feel at my best when I'm running. Strange to people who don't run, but maybe you swim or whatever. Anyway, it's just a feel-good t-shirt. Running is another story in my life, a chapter, but it's not the one I'm going to talk to you about today. How many people here know their Myers-Briggs personality type? Okay, a few hands going up, but this is not going to be a talk about Myers-Briggs. But what Myers-Briggs does, it has 16 personality types, and often used in the workplace. And from that we learn that we are different, that no personality type is better than another one. But we're different, and we can be very different. So Myers-Briggs gives us one avenue to get insight to ourselves. How many people here have heard of the Enneagram? Oh, I am surprised. This is great. Really surprised at the number of hands. I'm kind of surprised. I'm not aware of an Enneagram practitioner in Lakeside. It's a different personality system. It has 9 personality types. I personally like it quite a bit. And no, I'm not going to talk about the Enneagram either. But there's many, many instruments today that give you insight into yourselves. And there's a lot of really good information on the internet. There's a lot of junk, but there's a lot of really good stuff. So there is no one path into looking inside yourself. There's many paths, and if you look, you'll find one that works for you. But Myers-Briggs and Enneagram are as good a place to start as any. The idea of knowing thyself, it goes all the way back to the ancient Greek philosophers. Socrates took it to an extreme. He said the unexamined life is not worth living. That's an extreme. But there is something to the concept of this self-examination with some depth. Personality types are different, not right or wrong. But when we begin looking at our core beliefs, the core beliefs that drive our values and our behaviors, that's when we start to seeing ourselves and seeing each other. I'm right, you're wrong. And it is much more difficult to find out what your own core beliefs are than it is your personality type. I have not yet found, there probably are, but I have not yet found a good instrument to really get at the depth of your core beliefs. But what is it? Just asking yourself the question, what is it that I believe that drives my behavior and drives my values? And then you find that's where conflict starts. That's where the polarization starts. Last week, David Bryan gave a talk that I found really quite interesting because he talked about how there is a lie inside a belief, and I'm going to explore that a little bit. And he also talked about the concept of how rather than our minds possessing ideas, ideas can possess our minds. Another interesting idea. So I'm going to play with David's ideas, and if I mess this up, he's going to straighten it out. Next Tuesday he's having a session, and he'll correct any errors. So without his permission, I'm just going to use some of his ideas. And I'm going to do that by talking about a friendship that I have. A very unique friendship, one that has become very precious and quite rare. I'm going to go back to 1980 when I lived in Calgary, and in those days I was still a churchgoer. I'm not anymore, but I was in those days. And another young man moved to Calgary, and we became friends in church 37 years ago. Amazing. And it was easy to be friends because at that time we basically saw the world the same way. We had the same basic beliefs, we had the same outlook, we had so many points of agreement that it was just easy. But the story takes a twist because at midlife, him and I went in totally different directions. At midlife, I lost my faith. I talked about that in my spiritual journey. I lost my faith. I stopped being a believer. I stopped going to church. And he remained a very faithful, fervent, dedicated Christian man. And somehow through that, because we had already formed a bond of friendship, it endured, and we remained friends. And to show you how good of a friend he was, from Calgary, he moved with his family to Aberdeen, Scotland. And later, when I retired, I moved here to Ahihi. A few years ago, he was taking a trip back to Calgary. And he decided to make a little side trip to visit me. So, Aberdeen, Scotland, Calgary, side trip to Guadalajara, back to Aberdeen. That's impressive when somebody will make that much effort to spend a few days together. But that was the strength of her friendship. And it sure wasn't about agreeing anymore, because today we don't agree on very much at all. And there's another twist to the story that's going to come. I want to quote from an email that I sent my friend. His name is Hank. He has a name. He's a real person. He, at the moment, is between contracts. You know what you call somebody between contracts? Unemployed. He's still looking for a contract. I tell him retirement's great. He should just give it up and retire. But he hasn't quite given up yet. So, in the last 2 years, if you haven't been rocked by the events in the world, well, that's great. Most of us have. We're concerned about the polarization. The world just does not feel as stable as it used to. In fact, when you think of the polarization, I personally think it is so bad, or at least our awareness has become such, that the world order that has been built and served the world reasonably well for the past 70 years just doesn't feel like the world order that is going to carry us into the future. So we seem to be, we'll see how it plays out, but we seem to be at a time of very significant transition. And what's on the other side? I hope we live long enough to see. I don't know yet. There seems to be many different possible paths where this could take. But Hank and I have been having intense discussion over email for the last couple of years. Again, he's a Christian conservative. I'm a secular liberal. And what have we had to talk about the last 2 years? Everything. And some of that discussion gets intense. And we have actually used that as an opportunity to explore ourselves, our relationships as friends. And we keep coming back to, yeah, we disagree on everything, but yeah, we can still be friends. And that has been really quite an interesting experience. I want to quote from one email that I sent him in a moment of frustration. There were many moments of frustration. But I got really frustrated with him one time, and this is what I wrote in an email. And these are the things that you can say to a really, really good friend. Hank, you are a stubborn, opinionated, intense, blunt, direct, forceful, sometimes arrogant, sometimes obsessive, sometimes dismissive, but sometimes insensitive, but all things considered, you're a good man. I really wrote that. But then I wrote another line, and here's the twist, because I had one of those aha moments. Because he reminded me of my father. I would describe my father exactly the same way. Exactly. So I'm going to now add to the story my relationship with my father. Now, why am I telling you these stories? The story of my friendship, and now a little bit about the story of my father. Because every one of you have a story. Your life is a story. And by looking at our relationships, our values, our core beliefs, that's where we get to the heart of our story. And it is my belief that if we know ourselves well, if we begin sharing that with each other, then we will begin to narrow the gaps between us. And the gaps are huge now. I can tell you from experience, a Christian conservative can be as rational, as knowledgeable, and as good a person as I think I am. My Christian conservative friend is a very rational man. He's not crazy. His ideas are not crazy. And I've learned a lot from him. At one time I thought the progressive, democratic, liberal way that has served the world well for 70 years, that was the way. That was the way. I think it is a way. It is a way that I think has a lot to offer. But we better start listening to the people that disagree with us. And my friend has taught me a lot. Mostly we still disagree. I want to pick up on David Bryan's idea because I told a lie a little while ago when I was speaking. Did you catch the lie that I taught, that I said? I said my friend Hank is a Christian conservative. I said I am a secular liberal. Okay? The lie is that we are our identity. That how we identify ourselves is who we are. If you go to Walmart, probably everybody here goes to Walmart. Can you tell by looking at the people shopping who is a liberal, who is a conservative? Can you spot the Christian? Can you spot the person who is secular? No. That is not our identity at all. So the idea that we are our identity, and we believe, right? This is what I am. We believe that. That is one of our core beliefs. And I think I'm with David that somewhere inside that is a lie. And the lie is that we are our identity. So I'm going to reframe a little bit my relationship with my friend Hank. How about if I say, Hank is a human being with some Christian conservative views, and I am a human being with some secular liberal views. Now we first identify ourselves with our common humanity. We have some place to start that is in common. We're both human beings. We're people. And we can go deeper than that. Do any of us think we have complete knowledge? I doubt if anybody here says, I know everything. Okay? If you think that, you think you're God, and then I probably should go back to my mental health talk. So I think that's an easy thing to agree on, that none of us know everything, that we have complete knowledge. So my friend Hank is a Christian, is a human being with some Christian conservative views and has incomplete knowledge. And I would describe myself that way. We started a nonfiction book club. If you want to understand how little you know, look at all the books that are published constantly. I keep a wish list, an Amazon wish list. And when I see a book that I would like to read, I add it to my wish list. And what does Amazon do? Their computer algorithm sends me 10 suggestions, and they're all good. So my list grows and grows and grows. There are hundreds, no, thousands of books I'll never read. What I don't know is way more than what I do know, what I could possibly know. So if we begin to look at each other, every one of us has incomplete knowledge. So I see myself and I see my friend as two human beings with very different views, both having incomplete knowledge. Let's add one more dimension to that. How certain are we of what we know? When I was 18, and I'll talk about a little incident with my father. When I was 18, I was pretty certain about a lot of things. I was pretty certain about a lot of things until just about midlife. But that's when I lost my faith. I woke up one morning. It was actually a process that took time. But I woke up and I realized around midlife that just about everything I had built my life on was wrong. And looking back now, that's a tremendous gift. Some people think they've done nothing wrong their whole lives, right? That's just, they're full of arrogance, full of defensiveness, admit no mistakes. We know people like that. I had to confront the fact at midlife that I was wrong about pretty much everything. And I had to rebuild my life and rebuild a worldview. Then I bought into secular humanism, which I still think is a really good way of seeing the world. And I like democracy, and I see a lot of strength to the capitalist system. And where are we at now? We're starting to question some of these things. So I had a period of certainty, became very destabilized, found a new belief system, and I kind of feel now shaky again. Okay, I want to talk about my father a little bit. And all of you have fathers and mothers, and you've had a relationship with your father and mother, good, bad, or indifferent. It is another way that we get insight into ourselves, deep into our own being. My first big journey in life was when I was 18. When I was 18, I grew up in Nova Scotia, and I decided it was time to leave home. It was time to leave Nova Scotia. It was time to go west, and I ended up in Calgary, Alberta. But I still remember at 18 what my father said to me when I left. It's one of those moments that you never forget. Because here's what my father said. He said, "John, you'll be back home in no time. You're not ready to make it on your own." Ouch! Oh, that hurt. That was just one of my childhood hurts. It was his way of trying to help me. My father was not a bad man. But that was a childhood hurt. It gave me a lot of energy. I never went back home to live. I had to prove to him I was going to make it on my own. So in a way, he did help me, not quite the way he intended, but I was not going to go back. And I didn't make a great success of my life, but it was okay. It was ordinary. It was good enough. And I certainly did not need to go back and get his help. But when I moved from Nova Scotia to Calgary, I took my relationship with my father with me. And it took me years to really understand my childhood hurts, to come to grips with them, and for that to play out. And it wasn't until I had that aha moment with my friend Hank that I understood my father, because my father was a Christian conservative. And I became a secular liberal, and that's a big gap. But at 18, I did not know my father's story at all. So I had very little sympathy, compassion, empathy for him. At 18, I just knew, I don't like this guy, I got to get out of here. But I see it differently now. And I've become more interested in my father's story. And here's a little bit of it. So my father was born in 1921 in Holland. Okay, that is significant. Because in 1940, the Germans invaded. My father was 19 years old. And he lived in occupied Holland from 1940 till the Canadian troops liberated that part of Holland in 1945. I have no idea what my father's life was like for those 5 years. It must have been very, very difficult. He's coming into the beginning of his adult life from age 19 to 24. He lived, and to the best of my knowledge, I don't know much of his story. I knew none of it at 18 because in our family you did not talk about those years. You just did not talk about the war. He came to Canada to make a new life, and that was our new life. So I didn't know anything about his past. And then when you think about it now, what was in his mind? What were his thoughts? What were his feelings? How did that play out in his life? I don't know because we didn't talk about it. But had he talked about it, I might have known his story better. We might have found some more common ground. It's too late now, even though I have good feelings toward my father because I think I can understand him now. But he's gone. He had a good life up until about age 85. After he was gone, I had a wonderful talk with my mother. You have these wonderful moments. And she told me something about my father that I heard for the first time. She told me that my father did not get along with his father. Oh my. He didn't get along with my grandfather, his father. And I wanted so badly to understand that story. And again, my mother was very reluctant to share much detail. But, there's a story there. What was it about the relationship between my grandfather and my father that caused that gap? And did that have anything to do with the gap between me and my father? Don't know. So think about this. A lot of you will be grandparents, right? And your grandchildren may someday become like me, in their 50s and 60s, begin to think about what story did my grandparents have? And what story will they find when they start to look? And it may seem now that your children or your grandchildren are not interested in your story at all. That may change. That may change, and it may not till they have their own life experience, get further along in life, have some things that upset their worlds, and they begin looking and searching and thinking, and they start looking for your story. So that is another reason to think about your story, because only you can tell the story of your life from your point of view. Okay, from your point of view. We can't read minds. Okay? We think we can sometimes because we create these little caricatures of each other when we know snippets. But the depth of it, you can't even get everything in your own mind on paper. Okay, there's a frustration in that, but you can go a long way. So you can begin to think about these relationships. And what story would you like to leave that your grandchild, when they are maybe contemplating life in retirement, what are they going to find? So there are many benefits to going into some depth, way beyond Myers-Briggs or Enneagram. That's personality. There's way more to our stories than that. There's our subjective experience, our lived experience of life, our hopes, our dreams, and our disappointments, our thoughts and feelings, and our fears. So fears and disappointments. Okay. I'm back. Don't know how that happened. Where was I? Okay, so exploring fears is another way. It's not an easy way. It's not an easy way. But to go through your whole life without confronting your fears, you can't talk about them until you find them. But it would be good for your grandchild, even late in life, to realize everybody has fears. It's just some are more aware and cope differently than others. Okay. 2 years ago, I spoke at Open Circle, and I told my spiritual journey. That journey continues. We keep changing. So if you tell your story at this point in time, I would suggest all of you, by living life, are a different person today than you were 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, however many years ago. And it is the continuity of that story. In some ways, you're exactly the same person you were, and in some ways, you're completely different. That's a story. And my spiritual journey is part of my life because I lived the first half of my adult life as a Christian and then as an unbeliever. And I'm revisiting that. I talked about the Sam Harris book when I gave my talk 2 years ago. But that journey continues. It didn't stop 2 years ago. I'm now exploring something called spiritual naturalism. If that resonates with you, Google the Spiritual Naturalist Society. Check it out. If you like it, let's find each other and let's journey together. I told the story a year ago of my mental health journey. That story continues. When I'll just share a snippet of it because I've had mental health challenges from teenage. When I arrived 5 years ago at Lakeside, I was sick. I was physically ill and I was mentally ill. That's how my retirement started. Not real serious, but serious enough. Serious enough. I was incapacitated for several months. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was laying down on the couch because I had no energy left. 5 years ago, I could not have stood here and gave a talk. You can have those rough patches in your life, and you can bounce back from them. So, what I tried to do in that talk was tell my story, because I hoped by doing that I would encourage more of you to tell your story, the story of your mental health struggles. And if you haven't had any, that too is a story. Not everybody has many more do than we let on. We pretend we are much better than we really are, and we need to protect ourselves to some degree, but we need to share to some degree, and you share by being honest. And I was a volunteer in the mental health field in Canada, and we learned that the best way to help people was to have people tell their story of their struggles and how they coped and how they moved on. It's that human story. So whatever you have learned in life is a story. And you can tell that story, and you can create all these chapters. And my mental health struggles was a chapter. As a teenager, I had horrible depression. Still have mood swings. Don't talk to my wife. Okay, I'm not going to finish, but that's okay. I will talk a little bit about the Ahihi Book Club, and maybe this next little bit will be where I wrap it up. I'm not really here to recruit members for kind of at capacity, because you can only have so many people reading a book, and there's lots of interest growing, and everybody is welcome. So we'll figure it out. But I'm also thinking of starting a Facebook group where we can, again, focusing on nonfiction, share what are you reading now? What nonfiction books? There's so many out there. So a meeting room only has so much room. Facebook groups can kind of grow and grow and grow, and we can connect with each other through the books we're reading. can't mention the book we're doing at the end of the month. It is an incredible story. If you can read that book without crying, let me know, because I don't know how you can do it. It is a very, very powerful story. And it has a lesson. I won't have time to talk about that lesson, but there's a lesson for us in how to live in retirement. Well, maybe I will. Maybe I will go there. Here's what Calamity writes. He's the author of When Breath Becomes Air. He wrote this in his 30s when he is dying of cancer. He said, "The tricky part of illness is that as you go through it, your values are constantly changing. You try to figure out what matters to you, and then you keep figuring it out, and you have to figure out what's most important to you." And I would just like to change one word. He said the tricky part of illness. I say the tricky part of retirement. You still got to figure things out in retirement. It doesn't just stop. Your values change. What is important to you continues to change. It goes on. So inevitably there are surprises. How many times have you heard, well, I retired and it wasn't quite what I expected. I had to make some adjustments. I've heard that a lot. And that's just realistic. You have to constantly be looking at the changes and making adjustments and constantly asking, what is important to me now? I will end on a quote from our book in the last month. The Female Nomad. I just don't get the title right. But it has one more lesson for us in retirement. Rita Golden-Gelman wrote this. "Until I entered my nomadic life, I thought of friendship as a relationship that needs years to develop. But my lifestyle," she hops from country to country, "my lifestyle doesn't give me the luxury of a shared history. And I need friends. I have learned how to compress time through introducing, early in the conversation, intimate details of my life. Once I've opened the conversation with intimate details of my life, the superficialities of initial conversations have been bypassed." So we come here from different places, very different backgrounds. We don't have a shared past, we have a shared present. But by sharing some intimate details, and how much you share is a very personal decision. You just don't let it all hang out to everybody all the time. But by the more you give little insights and snippets, that's how you can connect with people now. So that's another benefit of knowing yourself, knowing your story, sharing your story with others. You will find you make friendships and connections that way. I'm not finished, but I will stop.
If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand. A mic will be brought to you and you can stand up and ask a question. We prefer questions over comments. That way we can learn more of what John is seeing and learning in his life, discover more what he's up to. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand and we'll bring a mic to you. In the back.
Thank you, John. I think you and Dave here should have a tag team. I don't think I would be part of it. I'm speaking in a couple weeks. I have a problem with the idea that, let me just ask you then, do you think that people have to examine their life to be happy?
Easy answer to that, Don. No. None of what I said I want to be taken as there is one way to live. There are many ways to live. There are people who are highly introspective. There are people who are not very introspective. From my perspective, you are who you are. You live life to the best way you can, accepting the reality. So I don't want to suggest at all. I have lots of good friends who are not highly introspective people. That's just not their makeup. So no, I don't think it is at all necessary. It is for me, but not for everybody.
Anybody else? Right over here. Coming from behind.
Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. You said you were a runner. You said you were a runner. I'm actually a cyclist. How do you manage to not be competitive?
By losing?
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, over here, right here. It's coming. Please stand up.
As a runner, especially if you're not doing it competitively, it's said to be quite meditative. I'm not a runner, but I'm a meditator, and I'm wondering if you are either, if you have any kind of formal practice, or you take your running as meditation.
There's actually some interesting research on that very topic, because meditation can change your brain. So can cycling, so can running. And there is some research looking into how the brain actually physically changes. The research is in very early stages. From my personal experience, I wish, looking back, that somebody had taught me how to meditate when I was 20. I started to run when I was 15, and I think there are some similarities. I'm trying to learn how to meditate. The evidence is that it's a very good practice, that it will do some of the things for you that exercise does. I'm not going to be able to keep running forever, and I have some concerns, because it also is good for my mental health. But it'll be interesting to see where the research goes. Are there similarities, and in what ways are both impacting brain change?
Okay. It's coming.
Why do you think Socrates added on to that quote, an unexamined life, quote, is not worth living?
I'm not going to get into the mind of Socrates. Good question. To me, it's an extreme statement, but still a good statement. I would not make that statement. I would just use it as to examine our lives more. To actually get into what makes or makes a life worth living or not living, that's a very personal question, and we all find our own answer to that. But it would be nice to know a whole lot more what was on his mind, why he made that statement. I don't know.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, up here. No. Sorry.
John, if you were the leader of the free world, what would be the main priority for you to change the polarization that we're feeling?
Well, if I were the leader of the free world, we'd be in deep trouble. I've done well to get this far, just trying to deal with the problems in my own life, never mind the whole world. Again, the whole point of my message is we have to get away from dehumanizing each other. The extreme cases now in the world and in society is we not only think the other is different or the other is wrong, we're now saying the other is evil. The other side is trying to destroy the world. So the liberals think the conservatives are trying to destroy the world and destroy everything valuable, and the conservatives think exactly the same thing. That, to me, is the core of the problem and the gap that has to be bridged. At the moment, the gap is getting wider. The last 2 years, the gap has gotten much wider. At some point, there will be countercurrents and a counter stream to this. It's not evident yet. I don't see it yet. I hope we start seeing it soon. But we're either going to keep going until we get into far worse trouble than we are today, or it's going to begin to turn around. And you know, the lessons of World War II, what happens when you dehumanize another? Then you can destroy the other. And that's the direction we're headed unless it gets turned around. I think there are enough people who see this, who realize that we can't keep going down the path we are. A lot will, but there are already some voices saying, no, I'm a liberal, I can be friends with a conservative. We may disagree. So, wow, if I could solve that problem, I'd get a Nobel Prize.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tom. We look forward to seeing you next week. If you'd like to help us solve the cup problem, come at 9:30 and meet in there. Discuss that. Please stack your chairs, pick up your coffee cups. For those of you who are bringing your coffee cups, we thank you so much. Have a good day, and if you can take your conversations outside, we'd love it.